So you have an idea for a story. Now what? First, you need to ask yourself, do you have a good idea or just an idea? I touch on this in my video called How to Create Story Conflict. In that video, I tell you that in order for a story to be a story, it needs to have a strong intention and a strong obstacle. Intention refers to what a character wants. For example, a character's intention could be to go get a jug of milk from the grocery store. Obstacle is what's standing in that character's way. For example, let's say that there's traffic on the way to the grocery store. That traffic is standing in the way of the character getting that jug of milk. This intention and obstacle doesn't have to be external, it can also happen within the character. For example, let's say that your character wants to get married. Their intention is to marry the girl of their dreams. However, the obstacle could be that they are afraid of commitment. They are not internally ready to commit to that other person, even though that they intend to. This creates conflict within the character and can create a story. In order to have an exciting plot, you need to have both internal and external conflict. If you only have external conflict, you may have an interesting plot, but you're not going to have readers invested enough in the characters and people in your story to bother following your plot. And if you only have internal conflict, your story might be a little boring. So you need to have both if you want your story to be a winning story idea. Okay, so let's say that you have that. You have a really awesome story idea. What is the next step? Well, the next step is that you have to figure out what kind of story it is. I don't mean genre here, I mean medium. Is your story a novel? Is it a short story? Is it a short film? A feature-length film? A novella? A poem? A piece of flash fiction? A vignette? Maybe you're not sure. Each story requires a different medium to tell it. Not every story that is told in a specific form is capable of being told in other forms. For example, take the novel The Lightning Bolt by Rick Riordan. That story covers a lot of plot. From Percy discovering that he's a demigod, to him discovering Camp Half-Blood, to him going on his quest. That story would just not work as a short story because it covers too much ground. One of my favorite short stories is called The Specialist's Hat by Kelly Link. This short story tells the story of two twin girls who are left alone in a mansion which they live in with a babysitter for the night. Over the course of the story, they learn more about the house that they live in and the history of the house, as well as the line that blurs the dead and the undead. It's speculative fiction, it's a creepy story. I'm not going to spoil anything because it's a really good story, so you guys should go read it, and I'm going to go link it in the description. But as a novel, the story would be different. The story covers in time one night where the girls are left alone with a babysitter. That one night left alone with a babysitter is not enough to cover an entire novel. Maybe they could stretch the story into the novel by going into the life of the babysitter, or extending the timeline somehow and learning about the history of the house chronologically, or maybe doing something like they did in Wuthering Heights, having a narrator that narrates the whole history of the house and the people that lived in it, instead of just focusing on one particular moment with some people that lived in that house. There are ways that it could be stretched into a novel, but it would be a fundamentally different piece of writing if it were. It achieves something different as a short story. That's why you need to figure out what medium of writing best serves exactly what you want to do with your story. If you're not sure, what I recommend doing, first of all, is deciding whether or not this story is one that lives primarily in your character's head, or if it's a more visual story. If it's a more visual story, then you might be able to write it as a screenplay. But also you might not want to write it as a screenplay if you want to write a novel and want to be a fiction writer, for example. Stories that require a lot of internal narration are often better served as novels and really hard to do with screenplays. However, stories that are more visual and require lots of action can both be screenplays and novels because you can achieve similar things with both. So it depends what you want to write. If you want to write a screenplay and you have a story that is more visual, you should definitely go down that route. But if you want to write a novel, you can write a novel. Past that, if you're not sure what medium is best for your story, what I would suggest doing is just writing your story as naturally and authentically as you possibly can all the way until the end. Write it all the way through and then check in with it. How long is the story? Is there something missing from the story? Could you cut the story in some way? Alright, so you figured out that you have a good story idea, and you also have figured out what medium you want to tell it in. What do you do now? Well, it depends on the kind of story you're writing. Are you writing a story in a complicated world? If you are, you should work out how your world works first before you start writing. World works first. Try saying that 3 times fast. You want to figure out how your world works so you don't write yourself into a corner. As you work, you are going to uncover plot holes about your world, and that's okay. With your initial world building, you want to create a framework by which you can operate as you are writing that draft. The more work you put in up front, the more coherent your draft is going to be. Therefore, the easier it's going to be to write, and also the easier it's going to be to edit. You are also going to have way more fun while writing it, because you're not going to be so frustrated all the time that your world doesn't make sense and all these new questions are coming up, and then you get overwhelmed, and then everything feels impossible, and then you stop working on your project. If you do the work up front, you're going to be confident going into your project, and you're going to be able to fly through it at a quicker pace and with more momentum and not get as bogged down. You may not be writing in a complicated world though. If you're writing in the present day, you don't need to spend any time world building because the world has already been created for you. But there's also the flip side of this, and there's the flip side to anything, where you don't want to spend too much time world building up front because then you might not actually start writing. You don't want to put off writing for a really long time because writing a complicated world is naturally going to create new questions and force you to discover new things about your world. You might not think of all the things up front, and when you actually have to write them into your story, they're going to jog your memory and they're going to force you to actually finish your world building. So you want to do world building work up front, but you don't want to put in too much time that you end up wasting time creating things that you're not actually going to use. I know I personally have the tendency to spend way too much time upfront world building and need to force myself to start writing. I'm a perfectionist. I want my world to be perfect before I start writing it. But sometimes you just have to do it. And that's the next step. You just have to do it. I wish I could give you more specific advice here. I really, really do. But this is one of the things that can't be broken down. I've made a video about how to write faster, and in that video, I tell you some ways that I boosted my word count when I was trying to learn how to write more prolifically. That video might help you if you are currently writing 0 words a day and want to bump up to 1,000 words a day, or if you're writing 3,000 words a day and want to bump up to 5. The tips in there can be applied to writers of any current writing level. That's pretty much as specific as you can get though. You really just have to sit down and write. You need to sit down, put pen to paper, and go after it relentlessly. You need to write until the end of your story and not stop until you get there. You need to be fierce. You need to take yourself and your writing seriously. I often get the question, how do you manage writing while being a full-time high school or college student? I just did it. There is no hack here. I just sat down and I wrote and I never let up. My classes often made it so that I couldn't write every day. I can write every day now, but in high school and my early years of college, I just didn't have the time with my classes and stuff. And when I missed a day of writing, I made sure I made it up when I could write finally. Writing a book is hard. Being a writer is hard. If you are gonna do it, you need to really want it, and you need to show up. Show up for yourself and your story, and write as much as you possibly can. Just get into it. I don't know about you guys all watching this, but when I was a teenager and on Tumblr, I was very much involved with the fandom side of Tumblr and went through a very strong Super Hulock phase. I got, well, obsessed with stories that I liked. When I was really into a TV show or book that I liked, I lived, ate, and breathed that TV show or book. I wrote fan fiction, I drew fan art. The characters and their relationships in these stories just infected my thoughts, and I thought about them all the time. I got so into the Warriors Cats series that I made all of the warrior cats individually out of clay. I also created my own individual clans and made those out of clay. I drew them all. I created my own spin-off version of the clan structure in the form of the Brain Cats and the Laser Dolphins, which was a story that I wrote in elementary school. I reached points in my obsession with these fictional worlds that I would have to stop and be like, what else can I do to express how much I love this story? I loved the Hunger Games so much, but there's only so much satisfaction you can get out of scrolling through Pinterest for hours and looking at fan art. I loved the world so much, but all I can do was sit there and think about this world that Suzanne Collins had already created. But when I write my own stories, I'm able to get this level of obsessed with them and love them so much, but be able to channel that obsession and love into something productive. I can think about my own stories all the time because I'm writing them. It is my job to commit those stories to paper, so I can get as into it as I want, and I have full control over what the world is. So become obsessed with your story. And if you're not obsessed with your story, change elements of your story to be things that you really, really love. Create a story that you fall in love with so that you become compulsive in how much you want to write it and think about it and create it. Does this help? I'm sorry, I wish I could help more. Here's some tough love. Stop procrastinating. What was that thing? That was the Nike slogan, right? The Nike. Just do it. If you want to go check out my advice for writing first drafts, I've linked the video in the description. It's called How to Write First Drafts. That also has some helpful tips for getting started writing. You can also go check out the other 2 videos that I mentioned in this video. I've linked them both in the description. If you're here and you're trying to learn about writing, you guys are writers. So go out there, Go be writers. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications. I post a new video about writing every week at the beginning of the week. And follow me on social media. I post updates about my own writing and writing process and behind the scenes footage of these videos on my Instagram and website and mailing list pages. So go check all those out. Happy writing, friends.